All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're tackling one of the biggest economic mysteries of modern history. It's a story about incredible wealth, a shocking reversal of fortune, and an idea that literally helped fuel a revolution. So, let's begin.
So here's the question that's right at the heart of our story today. Just picture this. In the year 1700, India was an absolute economic powerhouse. I mean, think about that. It made up almost a quarter of the entire world's economy. It was famous for its incredible textiles, its spices. European traders were flocking there, paying for everything in gold and silver. But then you fast forward just a couple of centuries, and the picture is, well, it's completely different. That same economic giant was now one of the poorest nations on earth. So you have to ask, how? How does something like that even happen? What could cause such a total economic collapse?
And this chart, wow, it just lays it all out, doesn't it? Look at that. In 1700, India's share of the world economy is that massive 24% bar. Britain's, it's tiny in comparison. But then watch what happens during the period of British rule. India's share just plummets, decade after decade. By the time of independence in 1947, it's down to a tiny 4%. Now look at Britain's bar. As India's falls, Britain's rises. It's almost a perfect mirror image. This isn't just one country getting richer while another gets poorer by coincidence. The data here suggests something was being transferred. So the question gets sharper. What happened to India's fortune? Where did all that wealth actually go?
To figure this out, we need to look at the diagnosis that was first put forward, not by British economists, but by a brilliant group of Indian thinkers and nationalists toward the end of the 19th century. They argued that India wasn't just having bad luck or failing to keep up. No, they said it was being systematically drained. They came up with a revolutionary theory to explain this, well, this national bleeding of wealth.
So here it is, the big idea. The drain of wealth. To put it simply, the theory says that Britain, during its rule, consistently took wealth out of India and never gave anything of equal economic value back. It was a one-way street, a constant flow of resources, of capital, of money from the colony to the ruling country. Now, this wasn't just regular trade. This was a system built into the government itself that siphoned off wealth. And according to thinkers like Dadabhai Naoroji, this process basically starved India of the very money it desperately needed to build its own industries and grow. This idea completely changed the entire argument against colonialism.
And this quote, this is just the perfect way to picture it. Dadabhai Naoroji, who's often called the grand old man of India, he came up with this incredibly powerful analogy, a sponge. It just captures the whole process perfectly, doesn't it? The wealth of India, like water, was being soaked up. But instead of that water being used to help India grow, the sponge was taken all the way across the ocean and squeezed dry over England. It made Britain richer, but at India's direct expense. This simple picture made a really complex economic idea easy for everyone to understand, and it became a massive rallying cry for freedom.
Okay, so if Naoroji's theory was the diagnosis, what was the proof? How did this drain actually work on a day-to-day basis? Well, it wasn't a single obvious pipe. It was more like a complex, hidden network of financial plumbing, built right into the structure of the whole colonial system. So let's follow the money and see where it went.
So one of the biggest pipes in this system was something called unrequited exports. Now, normally, if your country sells more stuff to the world than it buys, you get richer, right? Simple. And India was exporting a ton of valuable goods, cotton, tea, you name it. It had a huge trade surplus. But here's the crazy part. The money from those sales almost never came back to India. As this slide shows, the earnings in foreign currency were basically intercepted in London. And what were they used for? To pay Britain's bills, salaries for British officials, pensions, army costs, all sorts of imperial expenses. So India sells its goods to the world, but Britain cashes the check. India got nothing of real value in return. All that trade was just an illusion of prosperity.
And that's not all. Another major pipeline was something called home charges. This chart, which is based on the amazing work of another nationalist economist, R.C. Dutt, gives you a snapshot. In the 1890s, he figured out that a staggering 1/4, 25%, of all the taxes collected from Indians were sent straight to England. Just look at that slice of the pie. Imagine, the taxes paid by some of the poorest farmers on the planet on basic things like their land and even salt wasn't being spent on schools or hospitals or irrigation for them. No. It was sent thousands of miles away to London to pay for Britain's administrative costs. In essence, India was forced to pay for the privilege of being ruled, and a huge chunk of its national income was just drained away year after year after year.
So, we've seen the mechanics, the hidden plumbing, but now we have to ask the most important question. What did all this actually do to the people of India? What was the real-world impact?
This wasn't just about numbers in a ledger book. The consequences were felt in every village, in every family, and the human and economic costs were absolutely devastating.
Let's start with taxes. Now this is just jaw-dropping. In the late 19th century, the average Indian, who was already living on the edge of survival, was paying about 14% of their income in taxes. Now compare that to the average person in Britain, a much, much wealthier country. They were only paying about 7%. Just think about the injustice of that for a second. The colonial government was squeezing the poorest population at double the rate it was taxing its own richer citizens back home. And why? Well, they needed that money to create the surplus that they could then drain away, leaving Indian families with even less to live on.
And what kind of income were they taxing so heavily anyway? Well, look at this number. 20 rupees. According to Dadabhai Naoroji's own calculations, that was the average income per person for an entire year. 20 rupees. That is barely enough to stay alive. It's a level of poverty that's just hard to even imagine. And Naoroji argued this wasn't an accident. This was the direct result of a system that continuously pulled wealth out of the country, trapping people in a cycle of poverty they just couldn't escape.
So you can imagine, the long-term effects of this were just catastrophic. Because all the investment money was leaving the country, income per person basically flatlined for more than 100 years. This drain helped fuel Britain's Industrial Revolution, while India's own industries, like its legendary textile sector, collapsed. India went from being a manufacturing giant with 25% of the world's share to just 2%. And maybe the most tragic consequence of all, this constant economic bleeding meant that when a drought came, there was no safety net, no buffer. It led to horrible, frequent famines, where food was still being exported for profit, while millions of people starved to death.
Now, an idea this powerful, this explosive, it doesn't just stay in books, does it? The drain of wealth theory was a political bombshell. It gave people a clear, logical reason for why India was so poor. It wasn't fate, it was policy. And that understanding transformed the fight for freedom from a purely political debate into a fight for economic survival. It sparked a journey from quiet critique to a full-blown revolution.
You can actually trace the impact of this theory right through the key moments of the freedom struggle. Right from its start in 1885, the Indian National Congress made the drain theory a central part of its argument against the British. Then in 1905, people took the theory to the streets with the Swadeshi movement. Swadeshi means of one's own country, and it was this massive call to boycott British products, a direct attempt by ordinary people to plug the drain. And later on, Mahatma Gandhi's famous Salt March in 1930 was a protest against the salt tax, a perfect example of a cruel colonial tax whose money was being drained away. Every one of these moments was built on the economic foundation laid by the drain theorists.
So at the end of the day, what did this theory really do? It completely reframed the entire conversation. Independence was no longer just some high-minded political goal about self-rule and dignity. It became an urgent economic necessity. The theory showed that as long as Britain was in charge, India would continue to be bled dry. To stop the poverty, to end the famines, to have any chance at a better future, India had to be free. It was a matter of survival. And that simple, powerful idea is what brought millions of people together for a common cause, to take back their economic future.
And so that brings us back to a question. But it's a different one now. It's not just about how India became poor, but about the lasting scars of that process. When India finally won its independence in 1947, it inherited a shattered economy with widespread poverty and deep, deep problems. The work to undo the damage of 2 centuries of this drain has taken decades, and you could argue it's still going on today. So what is the true price of all that lost wealth? You can't measure it in just rupees or pounds. It's measured in lost opportunities, in stunted potential, in a future that was stolen. It's a question that really forces us to think, not just about the past, but about the deep historical roots of the inequality we still see in the world today. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.